Nobody warned Saren about the one-night trials. She'd heard of them, of course. Everyone had. The way you hear about storms before you've ever stood in one. Just words, until they aren't. The Alpha King would choose a woman, give her one night to prove the mate bond was real, and by morning he'd either claim her or send her back. Simple, clean, brutal in the way only things dressed up as tradition can be. Saren had been chosen on a Tuesday. She found out the same way she found out everything in the palace someone else told someone else, and by the time it reached her, she was the last person in the building to know. Mira, who worked the linen stores 2 floors below, had come running up the east staircase with her eyes wide and her cap half off her head. "It's you," Mira said, breathless, grabbing Saren's wrist. "Tonight, he picked you." Saren had been in the middle of recataloguing the medicinal stores, a jar of dried valerian root in one hand and a ledger in the other. She set both down very carefully, the way you do when your hands have gone slightly numb and you don't fully trust them. "That's not right," she said. "It is. I heard it from the Chamberlain's assistant, who heard it from the Chamberlain himself. I'm a healer. I know. I'm not." Saren stopped. There was no good way to finish that sentence without saying something humiliating out loud, so she left it hanging. She wasn't noble. She wasn't beautiful in any way that made people stop and look. She was competent and quiet, and she kept the medicinal stores so well organized that even the head physician occasionally thanked her, which was rare enough to still feel remarkable. That was all she was, as far as this palace was concerned. She went back to the valerian root. "Saren, I heard you." "You don't seem I heard you, Mira." Mira left after a while, probably because standing next to someone who was very deliberately not reacting to news like that was uncomfortable for everyone involved. Saren finished the catalog, ate supper alone in the small room off the herb garden where she usually ate when she didn't want to talk to anyone, which was most evenings. She watched the light go gold and then gray over the garden wall and thought with considerable clarity that this was probably a mistake. Someone had written the wrong name. Someone had pointed at the wrong woman. These things happened. The palace ran on human error half the time she spent half her days fixing the consequences of it. By the time the Chamberlain's actual knock came at the door, she'd almost convinced herself. He was a small man with an expression permanently set to mild apology. He looked at Saren the way people looked at someone they felt sorry for but couldn't help. "The king requests your presence," he said. "I'll wait while you a vague gesture." At her hair, which she hadn't done anything particular with. At her dress, which was clean but still a working dress. At all of her, basically. "This is what I look like," Saren said. A small pause. "Of course," said the Chamberlain. She followed him through corridors she'd never walked before. The palace had layers. There was the part where people like her worked, and there was the part where everything happened, and 3 years had passed without those 2 parts ever really overlapping. The floors changed under her feet, stone to tile to something softer. The torches became lamps, and then the lamps became something warmer and less definable, and then the Chamberlain stopped in front of a door and bowed slightly and left her there. Saren stood alone in front of that door for a moment. She thought about the jar of valerian root still sitting on the counter, waiting to be shelved. Then, she knocked. "Come in." His voice was not what she'd expected, not something that filled the room before you were even in it. This was just a voice. A little tired. The voice of someone who'd been talking to people all day and was running low. She opened the door. The room was large but not theatrical about it. A fire. A table with 2 chairs and the remains of a meal that hadn't been fully eaten. Books stacked on a window seat with no particular system she could identify, which professionally bothered her slightly. And the king, standing near the fire with his back half to her, turning when she came in. He was younger than she'd thought. That was the first thing. Not young, he had the kind of face that had been through something, more than once, but younger than the stories made him sound. The stories made him sound like a feature of the landscape, something that had always been there. Kyle looked at her the way you look at someone when you're trying to figure out if you recognize them. "You're the healer," he said. "Yes, Saren. Yes," he nodded slowly, like he was confirming something to himself. Then pulled out a chair from the table and sat down. He looked, if she was being honest, a little bit exhausted. "Sit down," he said. "Please," she sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The fire made its small sounds. Outside, somewhere, the wind was doing something to the trees. "I should tell you something," Kyle said. "All right. I didn't choose you." She blinked. He stopped. Pressed 2 fingers to the space between his eyes briefly. "That came out wrong. You were on the list. I selected your name. But I want you to know I didn't do it for a reason that had anything to do with you. I was working through the list and your name was there and he exhaled. "I'm making this worse." Saren looked at him. An odd feeling had settled over her, not quite relief, but something in that direction, like a tension she'd been holding had been given permission to shift. "So you picked my name at random," she said. He winced slightly. "More or less. And now we're here. And now we're here." She folded her hands on the table. "What happens now?" Kyle looked at her for a moment, expression hard to read. "Traditionally," he said, "I would try to establish whether a bond exists, and by morning we'd know. And if there's no bond, then you go back to your work and we don't mention it again." She nodded. That was clear, at least. She appreciated clear. "And if there is one?" He was quiet for a beat too long. "Then we deal with that," he said, which was not, she noted, an answer. She'd thought there would be more ceremony to it. Something deliberate, a ritual with rules she could study beforehand. She was good at preparation. She made lists. She cross-referenced. She liked knowing what was coming well enough in advance to have a response ready. There was none of that. What there was, instead, was conversation. Kyle asked how long she'd been at the palace. 3 years, Saren told him. He asked what brought her there. She explained about her training, the opportunity the head physician had offered, the fact that her village was small enough that staying would have meant knowing every face she'd ever see for the rest of her life, which had seemed at 19 like a quiet kind of suffocation. He nodded when she said that. Not the polite nod people gave when they were waiting for you to finish. The other kind. "You wanted something bigger than what you had," Kale said. "I wanted something different," she corrected. I didn't know if bigger was the right word. He almost smiled at that. It didn't quite arrive, but the shape of it was there. Saren found herself watching him the way she watched things she was trying to understand. Kyle had the kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace, it felt like control. Like something moving underneath it that he'd gotten very good at not showing. She'd seen it before in patients who were in more pain than they were letting on. The particular quality of someone holding their expression in place by effort. "Are you all right?" she asked. Because she was not very good at leaving things alone, he looked at her as if she'd said something unexpected. "Fine," he said. Automatic, the answer that came before thinking. "You don't have to say that. He stopped. Something recalibrated behind his eyes. "It's been a long month," he said finally. "The border situation." Kale's eyes sharpened. "You know about that?" "I'm a healer. We got 6 men through the infirmary last week. 2 of them were in a bad way." She paused. I know what injuries like that mean. He was looking at Saren differently now. Not as if she'd become more interesting, more like he'd placed her correctly somewhere in his mind, after not quite knowing where she fit. "Yes," he said. "The border situation." "I'm sorry," Saren said. Because she was. Actually. Because she'd seen the faces of those men, and it was not abstract to her. KL was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. and it sounded like he meant it, which she hadn't expected. They ate something. Or he ate something, working through the plate that had been sitting there, and Saren accepted the cup of tea the Chamberlain appeared with at some point and sipped it slowly. The fire had burned lower. She wasn't sure when that had happened. She realized, somewhere in the second hour, that she had completely forgotten to be nervous. That itself made her nervous. Because she was being honest with herself, he was not what she'd built in her head. She'd built something colder, more removed, something that would make this easy to set aside in the morning. This was not easy to set aside. He was sitting across from her, with his sleeves pushed up, and his hair slightly disarranged from where he'd run a hand through it at some point, talking about supply chains running out of the Eastern Territories, with the genuine, frustrated concentration of a man who had thought about this problem a great deal, and not yet solved it. And she was following it. She had thoughts about it. She told him one of them, almost by accident, and Kyle sat forward slightly the way people do when they're actually listening. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. It was about distribution points and the way centralizing storage created vulnerability. She'd seen the same principle in medicinal supply routes, how bottlenecks formed, how to route around them. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You're right," Kale said. Simply, no qualification. "You don't have to, I know I don't have to. No edge in it. You're right. It's a straightforward application of something I've been overcomplicating." Saren looked down at her tea. There was a warmth somewhere in her chest that she would have preferred not to be there. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes, why do you do the trials?" Kale was very still for a moment. "Because the bond is real," he said, "and I'd rather find it this way than not find it at all. What if there's no bond tonight? Then there's no bond. And you just keep trying, woman after woman, until you find one?" Something shifted in his expression. "When you say it like that, I'm not saying it any particular way. I'm asking." Kyle looked at her steadily. "The council sets the list," he said carefully. "I don't choose the women." Saren went very still. "The list was already made," he said. "I just selected names from it. I thought I'd explained that. You said you selected my name at random. From the list. Who made the list?" A pause. "The council." She sat with that for a moment. "Turned it over. So you're working through a list of women your council approved," she said slowly, "one per night, until you find a mate." He looked, briefly, like he was aware of exactly how that sounded. "It's a formal process," he said. "I understand that." And she did understand it. She also understood that the warmth in her chest had been real, and the conversation had been real, and whatever this night had been, it had mattered to her, which was its own problem. "I think I need some air," she said. Kyle stood immediately when she did. That surprised her, the automatic courtesy of it. There was a door at the far end of the room that opened to a small balcony. She hadn't noticed it. Saren went to it, and he let her. Didn't follow. Didn't say anything. She stood in the night air and looked at the dark and thought about the list. She thought about the way he'd said her name, like he'd known it before she walked in. She thought about the 6 men in the infirmary. She thought about the Valerian route, and the ledger, and 3 years of being exactly what was needed without anyone particularly noticing. The bond. She didn't know if she felt it. She'd heard descriptions that contradicted each other. A pull. A certainty. A warmth. Half of what people described sounded like falling in love, and the other half sounded like recognition, like seeing someone you'd somehow already known. She thought she might feel something. She wasn't sure if she trusted that feeling. She stayed on the balcony for a while. KL didn't come to get her. The night moved slowly after that. Saren came back inside. He had refilled her tea without being asked, which was a small thing and shouldn't have registered the way it did. She sat back down, and there was a moment where neither of them said anything, and the room felt different from how it had felt at the start. Less formal. More like somewhere two people had been sitting for a while. She asked about the books on the window seat. Kyle looked faintly embarrassed. I start more than I finish, he said. What's the system? There isn't one. Saren glanced over at the stacks. Her fingers had an actual physical urge to organize them that she suppressed with some effort. I can see that. I know where everything is, he said, with the confidence of someone who absolutely did not know where everything was. You know where some of it is, she said, and you've made peace with the rest. Kyle laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. Not the kind that was performed for a room, just a sound that happened because something was genuinely funny. It landed somewhere it shouldn't have. Saren looked away. Out the window, the sky had gone from black to that particular dark blue that meant hours had passed and morning wasn't close, but it was no longer unthinkably far. Tell me something true, Kyle said. She looked back. He was watching her with an expression that was difficult to look at directly. About what? Anything. Whatever you'd say if this were a different kind of conversation. She considered that. I'm afraid, Saren said, of being ordinary. He didn't react with pity. He just waited. Not I don't mean I want to be exceptional for its own sake. I mean I'm afraid of disappearing. Of being the person who does everything correctly and completely and no one can quite remember afterward. She paused. I'm very good at my work and I don't think it's enough. Enough for what? To matter, to leave a mark on anything. I have very neat handwriting and an extremely organized medicinal store, and 6 years from now someone else will reorganize it and it'll be exactly as if I wasn't there. He was quiet for a moment. I know that feeling, Kyle said. Saren almost said you're the king, but she stopped herself, because that was probably exactly wrong. Being the king didn't make you matter. It made you visible. Those were different things. What would make it feel like enough, for you? She asked. He thought about it the same way she had actually thought about it, not reaching for a ready answer. To do something right, Kale said finally. Not correctly. Right, something I look back on and can say that was the choice I'd make again. That one. And you haven't found one yet? Not one I'm sure of. The fire had gone low enough that she could see his face more clearly in the dimmer light. The tiredness she'd read as control there was still control in it, but there was also something she hadn't seen before. Something she'd describe, if she were writing it down somewhere clinical, as loneliness. She recognized it the way you recognize something you've seen in a mirror. She didn't say that out loud, some observations you kept. Can I ask something I shouldn't ask? Saren said. Yes. How many women have you done this with? He was quiet for just a beat. Since the process started, 7, and? No bond, each time. She did the quiet arithmetic of that. 7 nights, 7 women, 7 mornings where someone had walked out of here back to their regular life. Or, in some cases, their not quite regular anymore life, because a night like this left marks whether there was a bond or not. Do you tell them? Saren said. At the start, that you picked them from a list. The slight pause before he answered told her the answer before he gave it. No, Kale said. Why not? Because it complicates things. You mean it makes them feel like a number on a page. He didn't deny it. I told you, he said, because it seemed wrong not to. You asked a direct question. I'm not good at lying to direct questions. You are, though, Saren said, not unkindly. You're quite good at it when you need to be. You lied by omission very smoothly for the first 20 minutes. He looked at the table. Yes, he said. I did. Saren stood up. Not quickly. Not in anger, just the movement of someone making a decision. I should go, she said. Kyle looked up. It's not she tried to find the words. Tonight wasn't what I expected. You weren't what I expected. She exhaled. I think I might feel something. I genuinely don't know, and that should be good news. Maybe. But I'm standing here thinking about 7 women who walked out of here not knowing they were item 7 on a list, and I can't separate that from whatever else I might be feeling. Saren, I'm not angry, she said. I just need to think. And I can't think here. He stood. Same automatic courtesy as before. I'll have someone I know the way back, Saren said. I've been here 3 years. A moment of quiet. All right, Kyle said. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when he said her name. Just her name. She turned. He looked like he was deciding whether to say the thing or leave it. He left it. Good night, he said instead. She nodded once, and walked out, did not look back, which cost her more than she'd expected, and which she thought about later in the dark of her own room for a very long time. By morning, the palace had moved on to something else. She went to the medicinal stores, shelved the valerian root, picked up the ledger where she'd left off. Mira came by mid-morning with careful eyes. You're back, Mira said. I'm back, said Saren. How was fine. Mira read the tone correctly and didn't push. Saren organized the rest of the morning's inventory and didn't think about the fire or the tea or the unsorted books, and she thought she was doing reasonably well until she found herself standing in front of a shelf holding a jar she'd already cataloged, realizing she'd been standing there for some minutes with no idea what she'd been about to do. She put the jar down, pressed her hands flat on the counter. She had walked out before morning. That was the fact of it. Whatever that meant for the bond, for all of it that was done. She was completely sure it was over. She stayed completely sure for almost 6 days. He sent no message, no word through the Chamberlain, no note, nothing formal or informal in any direction. Saren had expected something, even a brief acknowledgement. This is resolved. The palace bureaucracy completing its own process. Nothing came. She told herself that was fine. Clean, exactly what she'd wanted. She saw Kyle on the 8th day by accident, cutting through the east courtyard with a bundle of fresh yarrow from the kitchen garden, which was the faster route to the infirmary but not one she usually took because it was exposed and cold. She wasn't sure why she'd gone that way. She came around the corner and he was there, standing with 2 men she didn't recognize, all 3 of them looking at something on a piece of paper. Working conversation, they had the focused, slightly hunched look of people solving something specific. Kyle looked up the instant she came around the corner. Before she'd made a sound. Their eyes met. The yarrow in her hands became extremely relevant. She looked at it. She looked at the path ahead. She kept walking, because stopping would have been strange and she had no good reason to stop, and the infirmary was waiting, and she was fine. She heard him say something to the 2 men, one word, low, and then footsteps. Saren, she stopped. Turned, because there wasn't a reasonable alternative. Kyle had closed most of the distance between them. The 2 men had retreated with the careful faces of people who had read a situation and chosen not to be in it. He stopped 2 paces from her, a respectful distance, and he looked at her with an expression she didn't immediately know what to do with. How are you? He said. Not quite a question. Fine, Saren said. You? Fine. They stood there in the cold courtyard in the mid-morning light with the yarrow between them and the entire history of that night sitting somewhere in the air, taking up more space than either of them. I wanted to. Kyle started. You don't have to, she said. I know I don't have to. She looked at him. He looked back. There was something in his face she hadn't seen during the night, something more unguarded, maybe because there was no fire and no formal room and no structure to hide behind, just a courtyard in daylight and 2 people who had talked for most of a night and then not spoken for 8 days. I'm sorry, he said, for the list, for not telling you from the beginning. Saren was quiet for a moment. It wasn't the list, she said finally. Or not only the list, it was she tried to find the honest version of it. I didn't want to be a process. I understand why the process exists. I just couldn't sit there knowing that's what I was and also feel everything else I was starting to feel at the same time in the same room. It was too much. Kyle was quiet. "What were you starting to feel?" he said carefully. She gave him a look. "That's not a fair question," she said. "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She shifted the yarrow to her other arm. It was getting heavy. "I have to get to the infirmary," she said. "Of course." "The head physician gets sharp if deliveries are late." "Of course." She started walking. 2 steps, and then she stopped, because she was apparently incapable of clean exits where this man was concerned. "Are you going to ask someone else?" she said, without turning around. A pause behind her. "The council has a next name," Kale said. "They've been asking me to schedule it." "And?" Another pause. "Longer, I keep finding reasons not to," he said. Saren turned then. He was standing exactly where she'd left him, hands at his sides, the morning light doing something unkind to his face that actually made it easier to read. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to arrive and wasn't sure what the terrain was. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. "About what?" Kale said. "About whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I'll think about it and I don't know. I'll find you." Something shifted in his expression. Very slight. "All right," he said. She walked the rest of the way to the infirmary, with her heart doing something inconvenient in her chest, and the yarrow leaves leaving faint green stains on her sleeve. And she thought that thinking about it was a completely reasonable response to a completely unreasonable situation, and she would be very sensible about the whole thing. She was sensible about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she went back. Not to his chambers, she wasn't quite there yet. She sent a note through Mira which felt appropriately indirect, asking if he had time in the afternoon to walk. That was it. That was all the note said. She thought about adding something to explain herself and decided against it. The reply came back in less than an hour. Yes, just that. His handwriting was worse than she'd expected from a king slightly rushed, slightly left-leaning, like his thoughts moved faster than the pen could. She spent the next 2 hours telling herself this was not a significant development. They walked the outer wall that first afternoon. It was his suggestion, a route with purpose, he said, somewhere to look other than at each other, which she appreciated for its honesty. The view from the wall was the eastern farmland, and beyond that the tree line, and beyond that the sky doing something complicated with the clouds. Kyle talked about the border negotiations, not in the careful, filtered way people talk to her about important things, translating down for the healer who wouldn't understand in the actual way, details intact, the real shape of the problem. She asked questions, and he answered them, and occasionally he asked her something back, and they went back and forth like that for a while, and Saren realized somewhere in the middle of it that this was the best conversation she'd had in 3 years. Which was its own kind of terrifying. "You're doing it again," Kyle said. "Doing what? Going somewhere in your head and not telling me where." "I'm here," she said. "Physically," he agreed. "Your face went somewhere else for a moment." She looked at him sideways. "That's unsettling. That you can tell. Is it? It means you've been watching my face." He didn't look particularly guilty about that. "You have an expressive face," he said. "When you're not actively suppressing it. I'm a very private person," Saren said. "I know." Kyle paused. "It doesn't stop the face from being expressive. It just means the expressions happen faster, like you're trying to get through them before anyone notices." She didn't say anything to that because there wasn't a good response to being seen accurately. They walked in silence for a bit. Good silence, the kind that didn't need filling. "Can I ask you something?" Kyle said. "You keep asking permission to ask things and then asking them anyway. I ask permission because the things I want to ask aren't polite. Then ask them." He was quiet for a moment. When you left that night, the morning, I mean, you said you might feel something. I did say that. Did you feel something? Saren looked out at the farmland.